Okay, in this video we are previewing the delayed 2021 Rugby League World Cup, which is now taking place obviously this year, 2022, in October and November, just before the Qatar Football World Cup obviously takes place in December at the end of the year in Qatar. Now there are 4 groups of 4 nations each, and the top 2 from each group go through to the knockout stages. So we'll break down each group from Group A through to Group D. We'll go through each nation's chances and predictions, and then we'll look at the stadiums that are going to be used, which will differ from the stadium list video that I did a few years ago when the stadium list was announced. Some stadiums have been dropped off the list, others have been added, and of course with what's happened with the delays to construction of some stadiums, and then on top of that, the pandemic delaying the tournament by a year, organisers have had to shift a few things around, but it's still a great stadium list as well. So here we go, without any further ado, let's start with Group A, which contains England, Samoa, France and Greece. England obviously the hosts and one of the favourites. However, looking at how the Lions tour just before COVID back in 2019 went down, I have some concerns about this England side being as good as the team that made the final in 2017. I still think they're going to be the best in the group. Their recent international against France backs that up. I think there's a fair gap between England and France in the best European nations. So I think they're going to come out first of the group. How far they make it through the knockout stages, that is up to, well, the England team and Sean Wayne. Samoa, it all depends on what team they can put together. Like if Luai, for example, is one of those Samoan Australians that can be enticed to side with Samoa for this tournament over Australia, they could put together a world-class team of NRL superstar talent. However, looking at how the last World Cup went for them, the issues that Samoa, both league and union, so just rugby in general, Samoa has financially, it will be interesting. Now, Andrew and Matty Johns have obviously declared interest in coaching Samoa at this World Cup. So that'll be interesting if they actually get given the go-ahead to do that. But again, with the Samoa selection, what team they're able to put together, how much time they've got together going into the World Cup in a camp, and how they can do. Especially, I think France is going to be the trickiest game for Samoa. That could be the game that decides second place. The French team, look on the back of Catalan being so solid and Toulouse massively improving, they've got a good, solid, professional top 2 clubs to really choose the core of their team from. The problem is not enough of their team play at other clubs in the Super League or NRL, and that's a massive issue for France. Is they've definitely got the skill set and the talent. It's the depth that's going to be an issue for them. Their match against Samoa is going to decide who's second, quite frankly. And then finally we have Greece, debutants. I think one of their players or 2 of their players that have represented them in the qualifying stage are actually Greek. The rest are of Greek heritage, most of an Australian background, so they all play in the NRL system, so they're not untalented players, but let's just see how competitive Greece can be. They might score an upset against France, they might score an upset against Samoa, unlikely that may be. England, I think, are going to have far too much for this group, so I think England are going to qualify first out of the group. It's a battle for second place, and Greece, I hope they actually commit themselves quite admirably, and I hope they do quite well for debutants. It is important to grow the game internationally, but most of their players are Australian, who would have otherwise made this possibly the Australian side. We just don't know. There are some good young Greek players right now playing in the NRL at the top level, so it'll be interesting what strength team the Greeks put together. They could be a dark horse in that group, but I can't see Greece getting out of the group. Now Group B is Australia, Fiji, Scotland and Italy. This is a one-horse race for first place with Australia, obviously, the holders. It's all about who comes second. Now, this Australian side, though, has gone through a massive transition period since 2017. A lot of key players have retired for a variety of reasons. Cameron Smith, gone. Boyd Cordner, gone. Jake Friend, backup hooker to Cameron Smith, gone. The Morris twins, gone. These are key players that would have been available for selection or retired. Obviously, no Valentine Holmes, will he make this Australian side? So he was key in the last World Cup. So there's a lot of players who were in the last team that have since retired from the last World Cup. And in that time frame, Queensland is no longer the dominant state. It's now New South Wales. How many of those New South Welshmen will be in this Australian side, and how many of the Queenslanders and New South Welshmen are also eligible for nations like Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, the Cook Islands? There's quite a few of them that could actually represent another nation, and we will discuss those other nations, including Fiji, who are in this group. So, what strength Australia's side can be put on the field? Obviously, since the last World Cup, they actually have lost to Tonga, which isn't a good and a bad thing. It's good for international rugby league. It's bad for Australia. They're going to top this group. What kind of performance can they put in the knockout stages? Because I think on their day, Tonga and New Zealand can beat this Australia side. I don't think this Australia side is as dominant as the sides that have gone before in the last 20 years. But let's have a look at the rest of the group. Fiji, Scotland and Italy. This is a toss-up for second place. It's all about how that first game goes against Scotland and Italy for Fiji. Same for Scotland, same for Italy. It's all about how that first game goes against those opponents. I think on paper, with the talent available, Fiji is just ahead of Scotland and Italy. But it's going to be very, very close to split these three apart. This is a very competitive group for second place, more competitive than Group A for second place, in my opinion. But I think it's Australia's to win at a fair distance, and then it's who finishes second. This one's very difficult to predict, and we probably will have to come down to how Fiji, Scotland, and Italy first play against each other, and who takes points off whom, and then building a bit of momentum as well. And Australia are going to ring the changes for some of these games. They're going to rotate their squad. They may not settle on their preferred starting lineup until the knockout stages. So Australia may experiment as well with their lineup. Group C, again, New Zealand favourites, Lebanon, Jamaica and Ireland. Jamaica being the other debutants. Lebanon, I think, are clear second favourites in this group with players like Mitch Moses, for example, who Parramatta Eels halfback, who's also eligible for Australia. And whether Australia decided to pick him in their squad is going to be crucial for Lebanon's chances. New Zealand, they will have to be wary of the fact that Fiji, Tonga and the Cook Islands are going to be calling for services for players, same with Samoa. So it'll be interesting to see the strength of the New Zealand team that is fielded, much like the Australian team, with some of these Pacific Island nations getting better, and Tonga being the real dark horse from the last World Cup, and actually a very solid side in their own right. How strong this New Zealand side can be. There are players who can play for New Zealand, who play in the Super League and are still top quality players, and obviously in the NRL. Lebanon, it all depends on the availability of some players, whether Australia, for example, does actually select certain players that could represent Lebanon going into this tournament. Mitch Moses being a key one. Jamaica debutants, not much is expected of them, but a lot of their players play in the Super League structure, and then Dominic Young plays for the Newcastle Knights, so they do have some top level players available to them. Of Jamaican descent, and Ireland very similar with second or third generation Australians and second and third generation Brits playing for Ireland. So the teams that the Jamaica and Ireland can put on the field, we'll have to see how competitive they are. I think New Zealand and Lebanon are clear the two for me that get out of Group C. Group D is the one for me that's the most competitive and hardest to really have a think about who's going to get out. Now, Tonga are our favourites. PNG, outside of PNG, how will they perform? They performed brilliantly in the last World Cup when all their games were played in Port Moresby. The one game they played out at Port Moresby, they lose, which was the quarter-final. So PNG playing outside of PNG, it's going to be very interesting to see how they perform on the international stage. Their record away from home internationally is not great. Tonga, again, it depends what players they can attract who are also eligible for New Zealand and Australia. We've seen this debate, obviously, the Fafita brothers at the last World Cup had a key imprint in getting to that team to the semi-final. They beat New Zealand at the last World Cup. They've beaten Australia now. Since the 2017 World Cup, they're clear favourites for Group D to progress to the knockout stages. PNG, it's about how they perform outside of PNG in the Northern Hemisphere in a World Cup. Wales, much like Scotland, but Wales, I think in a worse sense, disastrous World Cup 2017. A lot of issues with Welsh Rugby League is not that they don't have great players that have played for them, who play in the Super League, and some have actually possibly played in the NRL structure as well, who are eligible. That's not the issue. It's money. Much like Samoa, there's massive money issues in Welsh Rugby League that are hampering the sport's development and the pathways in place, and that includes the international side and the structures when the team comes together on the limited times the team comes together, the training pathways, the structures. Wales. This could be a difficult World Cup for them. Same with the Cook Islands. Again, it depends with the Cook Islands what players are available. Chance Nicol-Klokstad and Dylan Napa are two of the high-profile Cook Islanders that will be available to represent them. Obviously, fitness notwithstanding, I think the Cook Islands have benefited from being delayed by a year because Chance Nicol-Klokstad has now recovered from his neck surgery. Dylan Napa is now playing first grade for the Catalan Dragons, so he's playing regular minutes, whereas when he was at Canterbury, the performances weren't there, so the form was slipping. So I think delaying by a year has actually benefited the Cook Islands to possibly have a better tournament with some of their better players being available and being back in form. Wales, I think, could end up bottom out of this group, and this group is possibly the hardest to predict. I think Tonga are favourites. They're not guaranteed to win the group. They're not guaranteed to get out of the group. PNG, they could do anything. Their form outside of Papua New Guinea isn't great, but if they can back up what they did against the Lions a couple of years ago and in the last World Cup and continue to, I mean, it's the national sport, so they've got a whole nation of talent to choose from if push comes to shove. A lot of their players who play in the NRL system play in Queensland Cup. They've got players who play in the Super League. They've got players who play in the NRL. They have got a lot of talent they can choose from and some top quality talent right now. And of course, you've got Wales and the Cook Islands. I think the way the groups are structured, I think the top two, Group A, England, and I'm going to go say France on this one, just because I think France have got a more settled lineup. Samoa, it all depends on what players are available. In Group A, Group B, I think Australia and Fiji. Group C, I am going with New Zealand and Lebanon. Group D, I'm going Tonga and PNG. I just don't think Wales are going to have enough. Now let's have a look at the stadiums that will be used for the group stages and, of course, the knockout stages and the final. The big ones are Old Trafford, Manchester United's home stadium, the Emirates, which is Arsenal's home stadium, which is the only stadium being used in London, so no Wembley this year. St James's Park in Newcastle, one of two stadiums in Newcastle that is being used for the tournament. Elland Road in Leeds, the Riverside in Middlesbrough, Bramall Lane in Sheffield. These are some big footballing stadiums that are used in the Premier League and in the Championship. The MKM Stadium in Hull, the Hull City Stadium, basically. Football and Rugby League Stadium. Rugby League Internationals have been hosted there before. It's a solid arena. It's a very modern stadium. And Hull is a Rugby League Man City, so that's the Hull Stadium. The Coventry, formerly Ricoh Arena, Coventry Building Society Arena. While it's a fantastic facility, and taking the World Cup to a more of a non-traditional location in the Midlands, I think is important. There has been a lot of issues with the stadium throughout its history: ownership problems, money problems, construction issues, you name it, insurance problems. But it is nice to see the sport be taken to a non-traditional location in Coventry. The University of Bolton Stadium, formerly the Reebok. So that's a fantastic facility as well. Aging a bit now. It's over 20 years. It's almost 25 years old. It still looks like it was built yesterday, but it's getting old in the tooth. But again, that's another stadium in Greater Manchester. The DW Stadium in Wigan, formerly the JJB, where Wigan Warriors play, and of course Wigan Athletic Football Club play. Again, similar to the former Reebok in Bolton. Around 20 years old. You wouldn't have thought this stadium is over 20 years old, but it is. But it still looks like that was built yesterday. And it is a rugby league stadium, so that's perfect choice. Now, the former John Smith's, now the Kirkley Stadium in Huddersfield, the birthplace of rugby league. It would be amiss not to have not to have a Rugby World Cup match in Huddersfield, considering the history and the birthplace of the sport, and the rules of rugby league were first written down, and the first meeting was held in that hotel round the corner from the stadium. So Huddersfield is on the map there. The Totally Wicked Stadium, St Helens. What a bit of sponsorship, vaping company. How healthy is that? The Totally Wicked in St Helens. If that is a true through and through rugby league stadium. The Keepmoat Stadium in Doncaster. That's a fantastic facility. There is no doubt on that. It's a footballing location. So again, while it's in the northeast, the northeast isn't traditionally a rugby league hotbed. It's more the northwest and Yorkshire. So that's a real key piece of logistical nous, I think, from the organisers personally. The Halliwell Jones Stadium, Warrington's home ground. That's a rugby league stadium. They are a rugby league fan base. Good choice. The Lee Sports Village. This is a purpose-built rugby league facility. Again, it's another one in Greater Manchester. It's the third in Greater Manchester out of the stadiums. I think no, fourth with count Wigan. That's 4 in Greater Manchester. Well, the Lee Centurions have had mixed results in the Super League last year, and whether you could argue whether they're the right team to promote over the expense of others when the Toronto Wolfpack withdrew from the Super League following COVID, the initial bit of COVID. Bloody cold. The Lee Sports Village is one of the smaller stadiums on the list, but is a purpose-built rugby league venue. Kingston Park, the other stadium in Newcastle, where the Newcastle Falcons Rugby Union team play. It's a rugby stadium. And Gateshead Football Club also play there. So it's not a rugby league stadium, but it's one of the later additions to the list of stadiums that will be used. Other stadiums were on the list initially and have been withdrawn from the list, partly because of the delay with COVID and partly because of building issues since the initial list was announced many years ago. Did a video on that, how times have changed since then. That's the second stadium in Newcastle. So Greater Manchester and Newcastle is where a lot of the games are going to be played. And then finally the York Community Stadium for both league and football. It's the smallest stadium on the list with the smallest capacity. But a lot of locals in the York area are very thankful that stadium has been included for some group stage matches. So there we go. There's the list of stadiums that are going to be used. The knockout stages, it gets too hard to predict because it depends where you finish in your group, and then it obviously depends on how he finishes second place or he finishes first, and etc. The progression that you make to the final. But England, Australia, New Zealand and Tonga are looking like your 4 favourites for the semi-finals, which will be interesting if 1 or 2 of those nations don't make it to the semi-finals. That could be very interesting there, your 4 semi-final favourites, although PNG and Fiji and maybe some other might throw a spanner in the works there. But there we go. There's my little preview of the 2021 Rugby League World Cup. And of course, we've looked at the stadiums as well. Thank you very much for watching for nearly 20 minutes. I do appreciate those who've stuck with us for this long. Please leave your comments in the comments section below, and I will have some more videos for you very, very soon.